Welcome to the Happy Market Research Podcast, your favorite place for strategies, stories, and insights from the world of market research. Brought to you by your host, Dan Fleetwood.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Happy Market Research Podcast. I am your host, Dan Fleetwood. Today is a very special episode. Normally, I just have one guest. Today, I have three. And we're going to be talking about how UX researchers shape the future of play. And so what I want to do first is have everybody give a brief introduction about yourself. So Nick, we'll start with you, then Rob, then Viv.
Sure. Hi, I'm Nik Blach. I worked at Epic Games for about 7 years, primarily supporting Fortnite, Fall Guys, Rocket League, all that good stuff. And at the end of my time there, I was running their data research team, which was focused on survey feedback and research like that.
Awesome. Rob?
My name is Rob Aseron. I do mostly research consulting. I'm also building a research consulting related tool. When I worked at Zynga, which was during its super high growth phase, was director of UX research. So that included lots of different stuff, like all the areas of research, benchmarking, competitive evaluation, feature development, launch, pre-launch, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Viv?
Thank you, Dan. I think I'm co-host of this show. I'm just kidding. I started QuestionPro back in 2005 in my garage in Seattle. I've been running it. I ran for about 5 years, then took a break, then came back to run QuestionPro in 2015. I've been running QuestionPro since then. So that's who I am.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right into it. I want to take a behind-the-scenes look at research influences, how people play, what they think about, what keeps them coming back. So to start it off, let's go, sort of baseline here. What does UX research look like inside a gaming company? And Nick, I think we'll start with you, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, I'll use someone else's words instead of my own. There's a gentleman by the name of John Hobson who wrote a book called Secret Science of Games. He actually worked at Epic for a while. He was an awesome guy to work with. But he simplified it down to its most basic level, and that is UX research in gaming is having players play the game and having developers watch them. And really, that is what it boils down to. It's about showing the developers how players are interacting with their game. Where it kind of expands out is when you have a game with 100 million players, like I had when I was working with Epic at Fortnite and whatnot. That's where it becomes sampling and trying to figure out how to answer questions about various hypotheses about why players are doing things the way they are, why they don't like, if they don't like. And, one core question that you hear a lot is are they having fun? But a lot of it is, that's where surveys especially come into play when it comes to research and where it expands outside of that lab setting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember way back in the day, I did a couple play tests for Microsoft and Xbox. And it was a lot of fun just learning and seeing the new iterations. And then the survey, obviously, plays a key component into that. Rob, what did it look like at Zynga? Was it slightly different or pretty similar?
A lot of the same. I think that the key difference that I experienced was that a lot of the work that we did was part of a benchmarking program to allow the company decision makers make the thoughts about where they're putting resources related to games and how a game's testing, when it's in alpha, when it's in beta. So although there's a whole lot about the kinds of stuff of developing for TUI or looking at what people don't like, that kind of feedback, there's also stuff about competitor games and testing competitor games and understanding what's appealing in you joining that same genre. And is that game in development working to get to that? If a competitor is a successful game in the market, can you show that your game in development is hitting on the same things that make that game successful?
What sort of tools do you look at it to, gauge whether or not you're being successful or what marks the competitive game is hitting? Is there certain things you hone in on there?
Really depends on the genre of what's going to make the game successful. Measuring the same thing in different genres, you quickly learn, that doesn't work in this genre. So one of the questions I think you're going to get to later is what's fun, how do you measure that? And that's very specific genre to genre. So you just got to find a way to measure. Survey is often a place where you start because self-report, quick and easy, get that information, and then you look how to tie those survey responses to other things you see in behavior.
Got it.
And there are lots. The product team will have lots of behavioral measures.
Yeah, and I will add on to that, kind of a backwards of what Rob just said. Oftentimes in gaming, we have the benefit of we have Steam charts. We have all these ways of seeing how successful games are. So right now there's a really popular game called Clair Obscur, kind of a shocking game. People weren't really talking about it much before it came out. Then it came out, it was huge. Competitive analysis right now would be a great thing to see what the game is doing right, what is doing well. Because the game's already successful. We're not worried about that. We're now worried about what did it do right to get in that position.
Got it. That makes sense. And then, Viv, in terms of how surveys and how you see this playing out, I know, we do a lot of surveys, obviously, for both gaming companies and elsewhere, but how do you see surveys playing into getting overall feedback in terms of what's landing, what's not landing for these games?
Yeah, I guess a little background. In preparation for this, I actually, I don't know whether you guys saw this. Tim Sweeney gave an interview with Lex Friedman, a long one. Or obviously, Lex Friedman's interviews, podcasts are really long. And one of the things he talks about UX testing actually in that 5-hour podcast is a long drive. I was doing a long drive to Sedona, so I was like, okay, let's hear Tim Sweeney and Lex Friedman for the next 5 hours. And one of the things he says is the best games have a soul. That's kind of an interesting thing that at least stuck to me, in terms of, and to me, gaming has always been fascinating because it really captures somebody's immersive experience and measuring and understanding how, both Rob and Nick are talking about is measuring, understanding that immersive experience really, right? I mean, and I think gaming, as I thought about this, obviously it applies to gaming, but at least our theory here is that it applies to other experiences also where you want it to be immersive, you want it to be really engaging. So that's why I was super excited about this because both Rob and Nick have kind of assimilated the underlying underpinnings of what is it to be really immersive, really kind of connected between the gaming provider or, it could be something else. So those are the kind of things that are super interesting. At least to me, with respect to gaming, that we can apply what we learn from gaming into other industries or other verticals, if you will, in terms of the core principles are the same. Obviously, in gaming, it makes a lot of sense because daily active users is the primary thing that you're or not the active users, or is the primary thing that you're measuring. But the same logic applies to banking and boring things like pharma and things like that. Can they be applied? First of all, can they be applied, and if so, how? Those are the few kind of interesting points that I have.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And then I'm curious of what a recent or past insight that may have surprised your team and shifted away a feature was built, maybe from how it was originally intended.
Yeah. And I have to be really careful with this one. This is where I'm getting near that line of probably what I should and should not talk about. Yeah. But luckily, because I worked on the biggest game in the world, a lot of my work is very public. And one of my surveys specifically has entire websites dedicated to it. Internally, I think I just called it the MaxDiff survey because it's the only MaxDiff I regularly ran. But it was a outfit testing survey. It's been more of a marketing survey, really. But it was a survey that QuestionPro gave me the power to do. And it was very contentious, actually, before I began running it. But we had a bunch of concepts that would outfits that could be in a game, and we asked players to rate them. And if you're not familiar with MaxDiff, you just get a group of concepts that we did 4 at a time, and you would say, what's your favorite, what's your least favorite? And it creates this really nice ranking score, the scaled utility score. And when I first ran that study, it was really a hypothetical, can we be smarter with how we're doing our outfit cadence and creating shops and battle passes and products like that? But it became so popular externally and internally that like it's part of the process now. Like when they're deciding what's going to be in the game, which outfits are going to do something, it's a core part to the point where I had discussions with different project managers and whatnot to not reduce the impact, but to make the impact a bit less, we were going to research fast. Like it would be like a week. We had the study turned around in people's hands and working on it. But they were pretty much trying to find ways of making it so like we could do it even earlier in the concept phase. So there's a lot less going back to the drawing board because that survey had that much impact on what actually went into the game. Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite examples. And it's a nice one because, again, if you look up like Fortnite outfit survey or skin survey, there's a lot of websites out there that literally show screenshots of the QuestionPro survey, which is fantastic. And they're just excited to do it. They feel like they're helping and contributing to the game.
Nice. We made it, Viv. We made it,
you know,
I remember, Rob, also, when you were at Zynga, you did a lot of Maxwell studies also, right? I remember that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Viv, I think that's the first time that I reached out to you, and actually you and I started talking is because I was like, I am using Maxwell so much. It's super useful. One of the great things at Zynga, we had panels, and when you've got games that are popular games, you've got super large panels of very engaged users. You can put a survey out. Like I used to put surveys out before I went home at the end of the day and come in the next day and have my sample full. And they're like, oh, great, I'll work this up and send it out to people. So, and we did a ton of MaxDiff because everything is important in a context, and MaxDiff lets you judge a context where everything is judged against everything else, and you really understand where something sits in people's decision making. If you have a large panel and you've got a operational need to be doing research, and this is not about, I don't mean to, I'm not denigrating, quote, insights here, but I'm talking about literal operational decision making. MaxDiff is if you can turn around quickly and you can, the discussion's happening in your company, it can really make a difference on a regular basis, and then people rely on you. Like, no, this really can tell us what we need to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Rob, can you think of like a feature that you worked on at Zynga, or that maybe some data that you got kind of changed the way that it was being built, or an insight around that?
Yeah, this is the best example I have is both a good and bad example. This is actually after I left Zynga and I was doing some research consulting then. Yeah. And I was working on a very popular game on console that was being ported over to mobile. And in order to accommodate the form factor of mobile, they made a number of changes. And one of the things they did is they really wanted to lean into the immersive visuals. And so they simplified all the controls and hid them when they could. You would use fly out menus to choose them, et cetera. And what they absolutely accidentally did is when they simplified one of the controls, it removed the core thing that was fun about the console game. Just by changing the nature of basically an interaction design for controlling an important. Sorry, I'm the same as Nick. I'm trying to avoid saying things I shouldn't say. Yeah. Removed an important way of interacting with the game, and as a result, because it was a skill and mastery based game, that interaction was less satisfying. And as a result, the strongest way to interpret the data is you guys made the wrong game as a result. And it was no longer appealing to mastery and skill development. And so I wasn't hired to study that at all. I was hired to just do hey, we're at late alpha, we're going to go and get beta. Just do a sanity check for us and tell us whether they like it. And as I don't know what you guys have done with game comments, what I found was really routine is I would get the build that I was going to use in testing, like maybe a day ahead of time, but often like the morning I was supposed to start. So I got this build. I had never seen it before. And I immediately recognized, oh, wait, this is not the same game because of this stuff. So how do I prove that? Right. And so I just inserted a task that would hopefully reveal that, and essentially just said, hey, you guys did the right thing. You wanted to accommodate the switch from console over mobile. You made this accidental change to a fundamental thing that you didn't realize you were changing. And as a result, this game is going to fail. And it really shows the power of interaction design in gaming, because it's all those little actions that add up to what is fun for somebody.
In terms of, Rob, you said that there are some core constructs of gaming that you don't want to change, or you want to make sure that the fun, the mastery, the fun, the skill is kind of. Did you guys have a model in play to kind of like measure mastery, measure kind of like ease of kind of moving from one level to the other? Did you guys put together a model internally to kind of determine?
Yeah. So keep in mind that the product team already has its own model, right? So let's say we had a bubble popping game at one point, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with that genre, but it's basically you pop bubbles to work your way past obstacles and to make your way through the game. And every level had different difficulty associated with it, and the product team already had its own model of how the difficulty should progress and regress, and to keep people engaged level to level to level to level. So that's just an example. Product team will already have its own model of what it thinks is important. From the UX research side, they might be paying attention to, in that example, a level to level difficulty. And one of the things that we could surface is other things that game appeals to in people that might not be being measured. For example, in a casino game, if you're playing slots or if you're playing blackjack, it turns out that what is fun for people in those games very frequently is not like, wow, this is the funnest thing ever. Often people play those games literally when they're on a conference call that's boring. And so they're just sitting there playing that game, or they're in line at the bank, and so they got their mobile out and they're playing. It's just a time killer. But then there are other games that are really immersive and really engaging, and what appeals to them is it's some other way. And like that game I mentioned, that was a sports game, that was really based upon mastery and skill development. That's what appealed to people most. And so understanding the different core things and in what combination with each other that are appealing in that particular genre of game, that's really important. And having a way to measure it, starting with, usually you start with survey, and that gives you insights, and then you think of behavioral measures that can reflect what you're seeing in the construct you measured via the survey.
Nick, is it the same thing for you in terms of measuring, I guess, fun, or what metrics do you look at when you're thinking about a game, and if people want to play it, like what's the construct there?
Ooh. Or does the fun thing, it does differ. It differs quite a bit. Yeah. Like and now I'm going to talk about things that I may have not researched directly, so I can be more open with them. But like, I've done work with Rocket League, but I won't. I didn't do a lot, so this is all just me off the cuff a little bit. But similar, actually, interesting. Hearing Rob's story about converting to phone. There is a mobile version of Rocket League out there called Sideswipe, which when they decided, like, we're going to make Rocket League into a mobile game, they did not just make Rocket League into a mobile game. They actually made a brand new game. And the biggest difference is, instead of being a fully 3D game, they decided to make it actually a side scroller. Ultimately, you have the same core mechanics, though, which is, there's a ball, you have cars, and you have to jump around and drive and use your boost effectively to block the ball. And that skill mastery, which is the thing that people really love about Rocket League, they managed to convert it over without, I guess, like, troubling the mobile player who doesn't have as many like control for once, I don't have a controller like within arm reach. Usually I grab one and show it. But anyway, but yeah, that's like, when you have all these buttons, it's a lot easier to do all these complex things. When you have a screen, you essentially have two inputs at once, which is your two thumbs. And so you have to simplify the game. And Rocket League, it wasn't about fun. It's about, recreating that experience. And how do you do that? You give them a system that they can master. But to answer the question, you kind of gave me about that fun rating with games like Fortnite, other things I've worked on. Fun is something we asked about. I will say there was some reluctance originally to really begin asking about that. To me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what the question is. If I ask you if you had fun doing anything, that means nothing. Even if you say yes, no, whatever, it means nothing to me unless I know what else you have fun doing. And so really fun or any kind of rating, it's just a baseline. And when you see it go up and down from that baseline, then it means something really important. And I can guarantee if you just do a thumbs up, thumbs down, if you have fun the last game, once you have that baseline established, which is probably going to be like, I don't know, 1.4 or something like that, because it'll be 1 or 2, or 0 or 1. When you see it spike up to 1.7, holy, something happened. We did something right, we did something wrong. We have to acknowledge that, and then see, does it go back to its baseline, or does it keep going in that direction? Do we break something? Or is the player base having a worse experience now? Fun is fine. I think my issue with fun is actually the conversation with the stakeholder after the fact. Like what I just told you is true. Like numerically that works, right? But now I go to a project manager and I say, yeah, we really messed up. The fun rating went from 1.4 to 1.33. That's so little. That means nothing. Right. But let's just say instead of using fun, we use the 10-point scale. Gamers are very comfortable with 10-point scales because all games are rated that way in IGN and whatnot. And, now we went from a 7.5 to a 6.8. We lost a whole number. Now that's a scale that someone can understand. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not asking about fun. It's like, hey, how would you rate the game today? It's a this or it's a that. And anyway, that all is to say, that's a way you can use a fun rating or a similar rating to just understand how the players are responding to the game as it is right now. I don't have as much experience. I'm sure Rob could speak better to using fun for like unreleased games. But when it comes to release games, that's essentially where fun or similar ratings could really work and help.
So there's a point of high similarity between what Nick's saying and what I've said and gonna say, which is context is everything. You're knowing the context in which you measured whatever it is that you're asking about, in terms of the genre or the point of development of the game, or where you're asking in the game, etc. Or what in between levels or whatever it is, and having benchmarks that are relevant to those contexts. So, for example, we had a fun score, and similar to Nick, it's like I don't really care what the fun score is. I care how it is related to the benchmarks I have. And we had benchmarks for alpha and beta and pre-release and post-release. And then in a lot of Zynga's games, it was a pop and drop model, which is you get the most of your engagement and all the other metrics early on, and then it tails off quickly. And if you could get a game that had a lot longer life, boy, you're really able to get a lot out of that game. And so just knowing what the measures are at different points in time and being able to say, hey, we tested this game in the market, that's the market leader in the same genre, 6 months after release, and it was at this benchmark. And here's where we are right now, right before release. And just being able to set that context really, really, you're going to have to be that specific to say anything useful.
So is there a better metric than fun? I mean, that's one I think of when, playing a game, but is there something better that we need to think about in terms of measuring it? Is it like challenge, strategy? I'm sure there's other things that maybe are more important.
I would say that there's nothing universal. Like when you said challenge just now, that made me think, oh, that only works for like a few genres. It only works for a few types of players. Fun is a better measure, but again, it's binary. Is it fun or not? Yeah. For the most part, I personally the 10-point rating, just because gamers have this rating for games. It doesn't work as well in a live service game as opposed to a single release game or single player game. But I think that's kind of where I lean. I don't like I said before. I don't think the the word on top of the rating matters as much as just having that benchmark?
Most of the time what I'm looking for in, depending on the scale, is just the effect size. Because if you can show an effect size with respect to typical variance, it doesn't matter what the scale was. You've essentially z-scored your effect, and you can say, here's what it is compared to the variance that we normally see in this, and then that will speak to whether we should pay attention to that or not. Then in terms of fun itself, all the different elements of fun, the global overall fun score, if you say, hey, was that fun, or some such kind of question, that global score really is pretty difficult to do something with. And those very specific things are the elements that add up to that, again, specific to genre, etc. Those are more revealing. Those are going to be more specific to what's going to make that game successful.
Yeah, I want to quickly add in. I mean, I think if you take this context, and there are two things that both Nick and Rob have said. Is one is context, right? For different genres, fun actually may not even be relevant for a different genre of gaming. So it's a context matters, which Rob's kind of clearly said, and Nick said something super interesting, which is is the relative benchmarking that matters, right? The absolute numbers generally, it is what it is, but the relative benchmarking, and I think the same logic. But the same underlying first principles can be applied to non-gaming related activity also, right? For, even something mundane as onboarding employees, right? So, all right. Mm-hmm. So there's a bunch of activities that, every company does in terms of onboarding, and you can, create an ENPS score, but the ENPS score for an onboarded employee is kind of irrelevant for that matter, literally irrelevant. But you can create some sort of a benchmarking score that you say, like, this is where we expect this person to be, or this is where we are currently. And then, every month you either go up or down or go up or down. If you drastically go down, then something's wrong. If you drastically go up, then you find out why you're going up. Something obviously went right, really, right? So I think the core first principle is like understanding the context, coming up with some measurement model, and then benchmarking against yourself realistically, right? Benchmarking your own self, previous month, previous year, previous, whatever it is from any time period. So those concepts are, I think, relevant outside of, as a general, and these work. The more important point is, these concepts, putting together a program or a system where you're measuring certain activity and then measuring it consistently over a period of time, and then doing some amount of analysis on, like, hey, if it's going up, why is it going up? That is a reason to find out the reasons, and then you go back to product or kind of strategy and say, like, okay, these are 3 reasons that made it go up. I got a separate question in terms of both Rob and Nick, and in terms of, like, how did you, obviously you did a bunch of surveys, but did you guys kind of, looking at the surveys, did more in-depth qualitative analysis also post facto, like, okay, you really got to dig deep into something that you found out, and then you kind of did, focus group / IDI / did you guys have a process like that? I'm curious.
We did a ton of Fatui research because the launch was so critical to the overall success of the game. And so what the individual embedded researcher learned during iterative Fatui research over the course of months would definitely be reflected in how we surveyed.
Got it. So you did the qual portion first, and then you kind of designed some sort of
we had a standard understanding of what was going to work for game or genre, and then we would tune it based upon what that specific researcher saw was working within within the game that they had been iterating for months.
Nick?
Yeah, for me, it's, I would say one thing that Rob has said that actually is a bit backwards for me is it sounds like at Zynga, a lot of times y'all use surveys early, while in my experience, we use surveys a lot later, actually. And we use them to, like, really iron down things. And so to answer your question, Vivek, it's like, oftentimes I was on an island. So if let's just send a survey out and I got some feedback and I wanted to dive deeper, I'd do my next survey. And it was oftentimes kind of iterative, like working to answer the questions better and better and better. Would take the results from one, talk to somebody, figure out how that changes their hypothesis, and then do it again, better, smarter, better options or whatever, better methods. And so oftentimes the surveys were the kind of the final way we got feedback. And the benefit of it was the huge sample. And because of the games I worked on, we had a massive player base, so we were able to ask pretty heavy questions. Like, we weren't limited to and you both have had to deal with me in the past because I was pushing QuestionPro and any software we had to its limit, kind of. But we had some pretty heavy duty surveys because our players would take them and they were excited to give us feedback. So we could really ask them essentially anything, as long as we were doing it smart and, we understood what are we going to do with these results when we get them back later.
Right. What did that feedback loop look like, Nick? In terms of, would you get the feedback and then would changes be implemented immediately, or would it take a little more iterative surveys to do that? How'd that look?
It depended. It completely depended on what it was. It really, really did. One of my achievements, my best achievements, I would say, when I was at Epic, is we had a survey that had a name. People in the company just called it by its name. And within that survey, we had what I called mods, which is like, we hear this basic survey, think of like a CSAT or whatever, that just goes out regularly every 2 weeks. But in addition to that, the mods, as I called them, were where the developers could just ask questions directly to the player. And man, when the concept came out, it was actually me trying to reduce my workload, because I was like, I'm doing too many ad hoc surveys, way too many ad hoc things. Yeah. So I need to find a way to kind of productionalize this. And so I took that, standard survey and then added these little segments onto it. And, with QuestionPro, I use blocks. So each block would be a different mod, essentially. But yeah, that would be me talking to a designer and, just hypothetical. We'll say, we want to know if this new shotgun's good or something in a game. And we'll have a whole block about that. And that block will ask whatever questions they're curious about. Is it too powerful? Is the range good? Do they want to see more things like that? Do they want to see less things like that? Does it add to their strategy? Whatever, all the kind of questions you could ask about a weapon in a video game. And then when I get those results, I give them to the individual, and, that might answer their question. Or they might say, that's not what I expected. I wonder if they're saying that because of this. Okay, now we do the next set of questions. And then we're going to understand, we're going to get down to the bottom of it. We're going to find a way to do that. And before I throw it to Rob, I will say the other way that this works, and it's unfortunately a very common thing in just UX research, is less of less of people coming to me saying, hey, I'm trying to figure something out, more of me forcing myself into a room and, trying to be the one with a bunch of PMs and be part of the conversation and answer their questions as proactively as possible, just so I can add value to my team and make sure that we're heard and we're, involved in the development process. Because sometimes they don't really make space for UX research to happen. So you have to make it happen. You have to force your way into it.
A little bit of proactivity works in your favor, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this reminds me very similar, Nick. We did this work with even Zynga back then, where kind of we created kind of the capacity to do ad hoc research very high, for PMs very quickly, right? So, at the time Zynga, I think, was buying pretty much a studio at a month or something like that. So they were like, assimilating a whole bunch of PMs. And I've had conversations with kind of people in, non-gaming industries also, like, where if you have the capacity, I mean, obviously both of you guys kind of are in a market where you have the capacity to kind of quickly get feedback. At least digitally, very quickly. But there are also other companies that can set things up like that, right? So it's not necessarily. But one thing that you said to kind of that iterative, like when a PM has a question, we can answer the question. So it's almost like an omnibus study that you're going to run every week, every month, every day. But you can add some consistent, customizable, things to that model. That's a very, at least to me, it's a good innovative way of solving the problem, where you got to run some kind of tracker study, or you're going to do something on a standardized basis. But then you also have slots for custom questions or custom needs, and the custom needs obviously change over time with respect to the context, with respect to, games going to get released or not going to get released, or we're not working on the game, or we're working on this other initiative and we have these questions. So I think that's a pretty again, I try to look for these kind of like smart ideas where you have I think the core principle is you got to have a customer base or a user base that you are digitally you can tap into. That's kind of like, in your case, organically you guys have it, but I think it can be built also. It's not necessarily true. Like people have customer advisory boards, different sorts, in different contexts. And then a consistent model for tracking, and then, customizable way within that, so that you can actually answer a very practical PM needs a practical question answered, and you can put that process together. I think that's a lot of, I think it would be useful for, obviously in gaming, you guys do it it's kind of natural to do it that way. But I think even in non-gaming worlds, that it would be an interesting kind of steal from you guys to say like, okay, this is we can steal some of these ideas. In places like, I know Rob, you were at booking.com, you have a lot of traffic, you can use it, but even in cases where you don't have that traffic, you can still figure out a way to do it.
Yeah. Rob, did you have anything to add on to there?
Yeah. We've gone a little ways away, so I don't remember what the original question was.
It's okay. That's how these things go. I think the original question was around what is the feedback loop from design into making changes actually in the game. But I know Nick had mentioned giving the devs access to surveys and so forth. Anything there that you would do at Zynga or other places that you found effective?
So just to clarify what Nick was saying when he started to answer this. So the reason I've been talking mostly about stuff that happened before a game was released was just because that was a big part of what we were doing. But we certainly did research all throughout the development cycle, post-release as well.
Sure.
I think what I found the difference is, in terms of the feedback loop, is pre-release, there's a lot of interest in, for lack of a better term, it probably doesn't strictly apply, there's a lot of interest in more discovery and understanding, and you're asking questions just because people have hunches about going this or that direction with what they're doing, and so you're getting a lot of feedback. Plus we had our own ideas of based upon measuring against benchmarks against market leader, we had our own ideas of standard questions we needed to ask in order to understand where we were. So that was part of the feedback on the survey side. But then we did a lot of direct observational research with people playing the game. And there's so much there that really leads to, because all of this, all the research you do, no matter what it is, should be, while it's accomplishing whatever task it's supposed to accomplish for the request or the interest of your partners in the organization, you should all simultaneously be using that to build up an underlying model of what's going on in this game, what makes it successful, when do people drop out, et cetera. And so if you're building up that model, you can use all of that in a constant feedback and saying, you can be more proactive and say, here's where I see is, we're doing great, but here's where I see we're lagging and we're not picking up this interest that we heard expressed early on, or whatever it is, right? So that simultaneously building up an underlying model of what makes your product, whether it's Microsoft Office or whether it's something very dinosaur-ish, dare I say that about Microsoft Office, or whether it's a really super fresh game. You should be building up that underlying mental model of how people are interacting with it. And direct observation is super good for that.
Awesome. Well, as we start to wrap up, it wouldn't be an episode if we didn't mention AI in some respects. So I want to shift the conversation there. So AI, is it, feel free, anyone can answer, is it changing the way you conduct or analyze research yet, or are you using it? How are you incorporating AI into your research day to day, I'll say? So Nick, Rob, Viv, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I guess I tell everybody else to use AI. I'm kidding. No. We are kind of experimenting. At least the engineering side is experimenting with Cursor and a couple other tools. We've had some good use cases that we've used AI in surveys, especially for fraud detection and things like that. So I think that's a good use case. I think a lot of it is use case dependent on or finding the right use cases. We know the tool. We kind of know what can be done. And that's changing obviously rapidly, but my analysis is finding the good use cases and finding kind of a good slot to fit it in is the challenge. In terms of, I'll give you a quick example. Our first iteration on the survey side, for example, was like, hey, you can go have a prompt and design a survey. Say, hey, I need to do a customer satisfaction survey for a restaurant. It creates that. We thought it would be pretty used, but it's kind of meh. A lot of people still are struggling with prompts and everything else. Then our next version of that is like, hey, look, you've already designed the survey, upload the Google Doc or upload a Word document, and we just kind of ingest. And not only that, the content, but we ingest the underlying constructs, which is like a if question, then it should be a max if question, or it should be this is the branching logic that's associated in the Word document, human related. Okay, if this, then go there. Really, right? It's not syntactical, but it's kind of program. It's human content. That seems to be getting a lot more traction, for example. So the same kind of same underlying use case. We want to make it, let's say the abstract idea was to make, designing the job so that, the job to be done is like, I want to create the survey, I want to make it easier. So that's the job to be done. And now, initially we thought it'll be prompt based where you can just interact with it and say like, you can go, back and forth. But again, that turned out to be from a user experience perspective, not very effective. It may be sexy, but not very effective. Everybody said it was a great idea, but nobody used it. So it's kind of like, that's the definition of, talk, but no game. But then the Word document upload, is actually more effective. We see a lot more people actually using that approach. So I think that use case fits in over there. So I think, again, it's not only just coming up with it and then iterating on the use cases is where I see a lot of like traction. Of course, not only, this is a good example of our own use case that I can expose, and I have friends of ours who are like, well, okay, we thought this would be a good idea, but then actually operationally, when you actually start using it, then you realize there are AI powered coaches, for example, right? Like coaching for like, and I think not necessarily, it's working, right? It sounds good on paper. Yeah, you can get an AI powered coach, but when you actually start using it, is it working? Is it effective? The effectivity is the question, really, right? So to me, like there's a lot of hype around AI, but effectivity of that hype has to be measured. And in some cases, there is the effectivity. There's the hype and the effectivity is there. In a lot of cases, there's hype and conversation, but the effectivity is kind of minimal to near zero. So in that case, those are the things that at least I want to watch out for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I share the sentiment. I remember the early iterations of the AI survey generator, and then to where it's at now, and people like, just I want to upload my Word file and have it there. Like that's kind of the crux of it. So it makes a ton of sense. And Nick, what about you? How are you thinking about AI and incorporating that into your research workflow, I'll say, or where are you at on it?
I would have loved to use AI for would have been. I have two thoughts here. One is just simply open-ended analysis. I've used plenty of natural language processing tools. I've even had them custom built by some of my staff. And while it's great, it's just like one level less than what I need. And using AI to do categorization or to find any, let's say, legally sensitive things out of 10,000 open-ended responses. Right. Gold. Like I think there might be some reluctance to trust AI in that way, but I think it's a way to at least get you 80% of the way there, and then you do the manual cleanup with your own eyes and all that at the end. But I definitely think that's a very useful thing. The other thing, and this is actually something I've thought about quite a bit, when I train my staff in how to write surveys, I ask them to think start at the end of the process and work your way back. So think about when you're presenting this data You like that? Yeah, think about how you're going to present the data to a stakeholder, and then what question will get you that. Because if you work the other way around, you might ask a question that like you really can't talk about, you can't analyze, or it doesn't really make sense. You're thinking too much in data. You're not thinking enough in like what the data is going to mean. And what would be really cool. And I'm saying this, but what Vivek just says, in my mind, I'm like, it sounds cool. It might be useless. And when I write a question, it'd be great if I could hit a button and it gives me a hypothetical. Okay, let's artificially load the question in and give me a blurb. What could somebody say about data from this question? And I'm like, man, that would be useful. So I could say, I think it'd be useful. So if I could say, okay, if I ask this question, this is the best case scenario about what I can tell people about it. That would be a cool use of AI. Like that would be something a little unique.
I think that's a cool idea. And I think, again, that it's a lot of it aligns the lines of storytelling, which is, I think, Rob's also kind of talking about, like the storytelling of the outcomes, really, right? The storytelling of the outcomes is equally important, as much as, if not more, quite frankly. But then the process by which you got to that outcome, and if we can figure out, what the outcome potentially could be, obviously, depending upon the data, the outcome can go, left or right. But that's an interesting kind of thing to explore, to figure out what the best case scenario, if this question gets answered one way or the other, or multiple ways, you can at least scenario that out. Like, look, you've got to have an answer that is like highly correlated to this particular thing, or not at all, or to completely distributed. Then what are you going to do? And I think it reminds me of the thing, the head of research, head of managed services, Chris Robson, he put out an article these rating scales versus again, we talked about MaxDiff, converting rating scales to kind of closed trade-off questions, really, right? So if everything is rated between a 4 and a 5, then it's not very actionable. It's like, okay, but everything is between a 4.2 and you have 5 different items. And we've seen this many, many times, not only in the context of gaming, but every other kind of feedback collection process where they are kind of breaking out a master component to subcomponents. And then the simple question, hey, rate these subcomponents on a 1 to 5 scale, and everything is between a 4 and a 5. And it's not very correlatable and actionable. And I think this tool potentially, I don't know, we'll have to test it out, potentially could say like, look, this is not going to give you any interesting data because everything's going to be between a 4 and a 5, and you got 5 items between a 4 and a 5. And then, the mini spread between the two are not going to be helpful. Whereas if you convert it into something else, then it's a better way of doing it. Rob, you want to say something?
So I want to go back because I loved what Nik said, but I want to add one thing to it. When I, the typical interaction with someone who says, "Oh, I want you to do a survey," I have this thing. You set up a meeting and we'll do it. We'll get going on this survey. And okay, great. And almost always what happens is they show up with a survey, and the first thing I say is, "Yeah, let's look at the survey." Let's just put that aside. And they're like, they're puzzled because that's why we're there. The meeting is about this survey. It's like, no, the meeting is about a survey, and it's probably not going to be this survey. The survey is the thing I do last. And they always stop and they're like, what do you mean the survey is what you do last? Is, well, someone wants to make some sort of decision based upon the data we're going to collect. We need to visualize that data in a fashion that makes that decision easy, or at least clear, or at least they know what's going on with it. And we need to have a measure that we trust in order to put into that visualization so that they can make that decision. So that's what we're going to decide right now. And then the survey will come out of us deciding those. And if we had an AI tool that set people through that would be absolutely wonderful. And that would be wonderful and ideal. But to answer the actual first question, sorry, I had to go on that because Nik hit such a cool point for me. The thing I use AI for more than anything else, by far and away, is RScript. I do a lot of work with visualizing data, and there's a lot of times where I want to do something, and I know the point I want to make, And I just, it's like, oh yeah, I give my data and I give the plot I already have. And I say, tell me how to draw a line over here that does this and put these dots that reflect this. And damn, AI is great at that.
Mm-hmm.
Really good at that.
Yeah. So
All you do is
two good ideas here, Viv,
I know. Ideas are easy. Getting it done is the hard part.
No, that's so true. Awesome. Well, Rob, Nick, Viv, any last minute words, anything you want to say? Also, let people know where they can find out more about you, and if they want to follow you, LinkedIn's probably the best spot for all three of you, or other places.
Yeah, LinkedIn's good for me.
Yeah.
Well, LinkedIn is not Twitter yet, so it's not fully degraded yet. So I guess
it's almost there.
It's almost there, but at least amongst all of them, it's still reasonably civil. so and apolitical. So that's also there.
All right. So if you guys want to find out more, learn more from Nick, Rob, and Viv, follow them on LinkedIn. Guys, thanks so much for joining me today on the Happy Market Research Podcast. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. See y'all.